So, Rocko's modern life. Static cling. Now, this was actually an interesting kind of thing. Because with these kind of specials, usually I kind of brush them off and usually just kind of brush them off as, oh, well, whatever. Just gonna do it. But something that pretty much sparked my interest. Not only having nothing to do on like a Friday night, and also a Sunday night, and being an absolute insomniac, I decided, why the hell not? Why the hell shouldn't? Maybe to see how the hell it was, and I was actually pretty pleased. So, getting into the start of this, kind of want to point out a few points, which is but we start our adventure. So we start the movie, and what it is, or not really a movie, more of like a special, I guess you can call it. But since it kind of has like near an hour of runtime, I guess you can pretty much call it kind of like a special slash movie. That's what we'll call it. But so it starts out with where we supposedly have pretty much left off with Rocko, Heffler, and Filbert launching themselves into space and for the next 20 years, and then, but in the year of 2019, they pretty much get released, and they return to Earth because they finally found the remote, which was like in Heffler's ass, and pretty much so that then they return to Earth, and Rocko, Heffler, and Filbert discover that they are no longer in the 90s and that they are in the modern day of which would be 2019 when it released, but it is now 2020, but still 2019 then, so already, how his friends adapt to it. How his other friends adapt to the new stuff that's happening and all the change. They adapt to it nicely, but Rocko, on the other hand, can't really adapt to it. Which that kind of brings up our first point of Rocko's view and shit. But before we get into that point, we'll have to go back into the point of Rocko and his pals before returning to Earth versus after they return to Earth. Which on the before and shit, you can see that Rocko, Heffler, and Filbert all kind of get along over a single show, which is the show in the fictional universe, which is the Big Heads, of course. But then it's like after it being watched too many times, the tape finally breaks and shit, so they're disappointed, but then that's whenever they find Heffler's been having the remote in his ass the entire time, which it's kind of weird once you think about it, because, well, you legitimately, out of all the days that he could be sitting on it, how has he never pressed it once? But forgetting the faulty logic and stuff. So they return to Earth, and then pretty much opens up to the modern day montage as everyone. So showing about Rocko, Heffler, and Filbert pretty much just messing around with the modern stuff, like the new O phones and shit. Which, not gonna lie, but I actually found pretty entertaining, honestly, with the whole like all the jokes and shit with like the fucking O phone and like how the O phone just keeps releasing more and more and everyone just and then like Heffler and Filbert just kind of buy it. Also, am I botching the name of is it Heifer or Heffler? Pretty sure it's Heffler. Oh, whatever. But but then like but meanwhile during this modern montage, Rocko is kind of getting overwhelmed with the entire shit. So then he finally returns back to his home and then he kind of breaks. He kind of has like a panic attack and shit. So then Mrs. Bighead comes into his house, which is kind of weird once you think about it, because she's like pretty much bursting her ass through the door without even doing anything. But that also aside, she sees that Rocko is having a panic attack over the fucking 21st century being scarier than everyone thinks, and Mrs. Bighead decides to pretty much comfort him by pretty much letting him relax and play around with mess around with the TV. So while she tries to get him, make him something, like make him some food or fuck, um, make up some kind of like warm milk and shit or whatever you want to call it, and then Rocko comes to the dark discovery that there's no more of the fatheads, so he pretty much panicked. I mean, he gets upset over that shit, over that kind of change, but then after that, like, this is where Mr. Bighead returns from his work, and after Rocko comes back and goes to Mrs. and Mr. Bighead's house, so Mr. Bighead's coming back from work after unknowingly putting in a fatal flaw after looking into the sky and having something fuck up his math and shit. So then he's returning and he doesn't realize that he pretty much fucked up because of Rocko, pretty much. And so then we end up getting in. So then like, okay. So then Mr. Bighead returns, and then he pretty much finds out that he's fired, and then after that, he finds out that his house might be destroyed because he lost his job, and then for like a new unemployment office and shit, which, but then Rocko comes, and then Mr. Bighead kind of panics about that shit because Rocko's back and shit, so he's kind of, kind of pissed off about the changes and shit and about how Rocko finally returns, and then after that he ends up so after he ends up doing that, Rocko starts mentioning the big heads made by not the big heads, but the fat heads. Shit, I always get the two confused. So they end up doing like the fat heads, and he wants them to come back, but Ralph, well, aka Mr. Big Head's son, pretty much just hasn't been around for a while, so then they stopped. So then they try to bring back the fat heads, but they needed to find the creator because they know that the new animators with the computers are going to end up botching up the thing and screwing Mr. Big Head over. So what they do is that they literally, they fly around in a drone, in seats that's attached to a drone around the world uh, looking for Ralph. So then they eventually find Ralph in a desert and selling Mr. and Mrs. Big Head ice cream bars and shit, or however you want to call it, Freezy Pops, whatever you want to call them. And so then they finally find him, and at first they couldn't get Ralph to agree to do to bring back Mr. Big Head Mrs. Shit. The fatheads. I'm always getting these two confused. So he at first he wouldn't do it, but then he kind of looked back at his parents and kind of thought about some weird ass memory of him biting off Mr. Bighead's retina as a child. So then he ends up agreeing to do it. So then they return to the office. We're trying to forget them. So they return to the office, and then this is where Mr. Bighead finds out that his son is trans. He is now a female. So, which I do say, it's a pretty good representation of trans people, because that's pretty good. Because with the entire thing. So, Mr. Bighead at first, he doesn't really care for the entire thing with Mrs. Bighead. I mean, he doesn't really care for his son because he's now a female, so he's now his daughter. So now Ralph doesn't want to work on the Bigheads project again. So then after that, they end up doing it where they end up having a fucking where kind of Mr. Bighead ends up kind of getting all upset because of it. So he's like, he doesn't want Ralph working on the show, or now as they call it, Rachel. They don't want him working on the show unless he's the guy. But so then Rachel ends up getting kind of depressed and shit, or I mean, getting kind of disappointed because he kind of feels like he disappointed his own father. So what he did was that he went back. He said that he was gonna go back to selling Freezy or Mr. and Miss had ice pops or whatever you want to call them. So then after that, they pretty much go over and So after that, they end up going off and getting disappointed because they pretty much doomed everybody and shit. But then Rachel, who is pretty much Ralph, he decides to go around and he decides to pretty much start making he starts making the special, and then he finally releases it, and then he's kind of like, yeah. So then he releases it, and then Mr. Bighead ends up moping on top of his roof because he knows that his life is going to be screwed because he's not open-minded enough to actually let his son, or now daughter, make the cartoon shit. Or make the special. So then Rocko ends up having to practically kidnaps Mr. Bighead and takes him to the office to pretty much watch the screening of the new special of the Bigheads, or the Fatheads. So they watch the special, and he finally comes to accept his son for who he really wants to be, and then he finally goes off and he's like, so they have like this like little kind of cute moment, but then Rocko ends up getting mad because gets disappointed over the entire deal with like the Bigheads having a new person because it's different. He hates it because of the change. But then Mr. Bighead ends up ends up teaching Rocko that you don't really have to pretty much that change is just something that's normal and that you can't really be stuck into the past and stuff, which actually not only reached like a few personal points with me, it also reached a few points with one of my friends, and we ended up having a discussion about that, and kind of asked about her opinions, and I will voice them in a little bit. So with so then like they end up doing so then Rachel moves on with his parents just pretty much, and they have some kind of cute moment, and then they end up doing. So then that's where the movie ends. But, phew. So, now, time for a reasonable part with this, where I'm going to talk about a few opinions with my friend Alec, which is not really a real name, but we'll just kind of stick with that because I respect her privacy with her actual name, and I ended up just asking, and she said that'd be cool if I did that, if I just called her what her current account is, what her current account name is. So I had to talk with Alex, and then I kind of asked her a few questions. First one was what were her thoughts on change, and here's her words that she said. Change can be important, but I always have a hard time adapting to it, even if it's a small change. So then I asked, do you sometimes feel stuck in the past because you can't get over change? So here's what she says. Sometimes, if it feels hard to cope with, I'll usually create something to help me adapt to it better. So then I ask her this question, which correlates with the movie. Which just, these are kind of like personal questions that would just kind of be like what she would say over certain questions. So then I ask, when something changes in a franchise that you love so dearly, do you get annoyed because it's different? And here's what she says. Can't really say I do. I try to see why it was changed and determine if the change was warranted or not. And then I ask, what do you think about close-minded people? For example, one of her friends, one person that she ends up getting with, which is just Sierra Spradlin, which it's pretty much here's her response. Personally, I hate them. If they're too stuck up on what they think is right and don't listen to others, then I absolutely despise that kind of thing. And then here's a real question that kind of it's kind of debatable whether or not this one could really just be correlated with the whole shit. With like the entire thing with like the actual tone of the movie and shit. I don't know. Like, I don't know how you'd exactly kind of put it out there, but like, I don't know whether or not this kind of correlates with the movie itself or not. This is pretty much like a debate. So then, question is, have you ever had that one friend or those friends that you bonded so close over a franchise, but then only drifted away because they moved on from that franchise? And here's what she says. Yes, multiple times. The first I can think of is my friend C, which she just calls C Sandwich, which is kind of one. I met him in middle school, but we didn't really become friends until high school. We kind of bonded over TF2, or Team Fortress 2, and the Donkey Kong Country show. We and a few, we and a few, fuck, we and a couple other friends used to watch episodes when we were on break. After high school ended, we stayed in contact on Steam, but really don't talk much anymore. So then I finally asked her the final question, which is, what do you think about parents disliking their kids when they see their kid comes out as trans? And here's her response. Absolute scum. Trans kids are no different than the normal kids. What reason do they have to dislike them? Transphobic fucks. Which really does kind of point out a few things with the entire thing, which kind of correlates with the entire reason that like most people don't usually, once they end up not really, once they become trans, they usually stop contacting them, stop contacting parents because they're afraid they end up finding out that they're trans, if the parents find out that the kid's trans or their own child's trans, that they'll end up rejecting them and shit. So, which kind of correlates with Ralph disappearing and then just stop talking to, like, stop talking to Mr. and Mrs. Bighead via postcards. And that's pretty much the entire thing though. But that's all I've got for. If you like this kind of thing where I just kind of play a game on the side while talking about a movie or something, then please show that please show that you actually enjoy this kind of content, and if you want more, and maybe kind of give more recommendations about movies or shows I can pretty much review and different games I can play while reviewing them. So with that being said, I'm going to end this video. So I hope you kind of enjoyed, and pretty much I hope that I kind of spared like half of this time, half of the time that you kind of that you'd kind of burn by watching Rocko's Modern Life Static Cling, unless you wanna. But I mean, just doing it. But there's also one last point I'd like to point out, which is Rocko and Ming about how the other characters being affected with it, because Mr. Big Head hadn't fucked up in 20 years, which was when Rocko left, so they ended up just, so he's got a lot happier and shit, so he's a lot happier when Rocko left, but then now that he's back, he's kind of just back on that little thing of depression, but now it's kind of that was all solved because Mr. Big Head is back with his son, or his now daughter, and pretty much just doing it. So with that being said, I'm going to end the video. So if you enjoyed, like and subscribe, and also check out Alex's DeviantArt and Twitter page, which is linked in the description below. And if you enjoyed, then yeah. And if you want more of this type of content and shit, then let me know. But if you want different types of content, just maybe kind of give ideas or something, or just say what kind of content that you kind of miss being there, except for the insanity of Minecraft sessions, because that kind of shit's just, that kind of ended with a fuck up, and now there's just kind of all the kind of drama between me and one of my friends here with her fucking anti-spider bullshit, so just her and her anti-spider stuff, so 90% of the show would just be her kind of ranting on about it, so I've kind of just stopped the insanity of my Minecraft sessions series, because there's really no point in doing this shit. There's no point, but anyways, I guess so. Just in the video here, so bye!